Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Friday Life Comes at You Fast edition of the Scientific Governance and Risk meeting. It is March the 20th. I'm thinking that this might be the last of our daily Black Thursday calls in that series, and potentially we'll go back to the normal cadence. We'll see how that shakes out over the course of the weekend. We might be reviewing that decision depending on what the weekend has in store for us. But today's agenda, what's that?
As I say, I feel like twice a week might be better in the interim because there's still quite a lot of stuff we need to deal with.
Like, yeah, that's entirely
possible. Not immediate stuff, but like medium term stuff.
Yeah. Let's consider that, and if depending on how the community feels, we can boost something up to like maybe Tuesday or something. Who knows? We might be having a slightly PTSD version of the call today. It seems like people are piling in slightly slower. Who knows? Maybe they have something better to do on a Friday. I can't imagine what could be better than this, though. The schedule for today, Long for Wisdom. We at the end of yesterday's call, we talked about many things, but towards the end of it, we got to an agenda item about PR. And for the nerds in the room, we're not talking about pull requests, we're talking about public relations. And that's something that this ecosystem, the community should. I need to catch my words, I'm so exhausted. It would be nice if the community could align on some ideas around how they want to tackle this issue, because we have a lot of tasks, we have a lot of domain experts, we have a lot of work to do, and frequently we get overly focused, I think, sometimes on monetary policy and risk and technical issues, but there's more to the world than just that. And one of these new unturned rocks that we can begin thinking about in our community is how do we handle public perception, and how do we handle sentiment, and how do we get ahead of narratives, and how do we correct misconceptions and inaccuracies in the ecosystem. That's a very difficult job, and it requires some nuance and some messaging. It requires people being very attentive to the temperature of the ecosystem and getting themselves in front of things. It's a skill that we are in need of, and I think there's people on this call who could bring some valuable insight to that issue that we need to deal with. And so we'll get to that. Cyrus is going to talk about the flop auction results. And then maybe we'll just have a general risky Q&A about the events of the week. And my Tote will initiate a conversation about emergency shutdown criteria. So this is another major issue. We need to continue these threads because we've been talking about SCD, emergency shutdown, for months and months now. And that specter raises itself up and then gets pushed to the side and or well, maybe just ignored, who knows. But the time might be coming soon where we literally have to address this thing. And so let's start kicking off those conversations in earnest again. I think that's going to be it for me. I will repeat the same thing I repeat every single call. Please do not be shy about chatting, particularly today, because this is just going to be a YOLO call. So if you want to talk about something, talk about it. If you have access to a mic, jump on. If you do not have access to a mic, please type your questions in the sidebar, and we'll read them out as time allows and as we notice them. Also, let's try to make an effort to have less meetings at the same time as we're having this meeting. So if there's a furious conversation happening in the sidebar that could be brought to the attention of the wider group, please do so, because frequently the sidebar conversations don't make it into the historical record, and it's very important that all of this stuff ends up on the YouTubes at some point, and in our Git books and in our transcripts and our summaries. Okay, I don't have any strong opinions about ordering today. Long, what do you think? Do you want to talk about PR? And then we'll take it from there.
Yeah, I can do. Yes, I mean, I don't have a whole lot to add, I guess, to kind of what you said previously. More just that like kind of seems like we need a way to figure out like the kind of problem we're trying to solve is a way for the DAO to speak like authoritatively on its own behalf, right? Like, so in order for that to happen, we kind of need to agree on a statement in some way, or like agree on like things we want to say. We don't really have a mechanism for that at the moment. And I think like if we'd had that, it would have been useful in this situation.
Yeah, that's a tremendously. Like I said, it's going to be a tremendously valuable tool in our tool belt. But you touch on kind of like the primary concern here is that we have a disparate group of people that are loosely collected together under the definition of being the DAO, and we don't really, or at least it's my contention that we don't know what that even means. But I don't want to ruin any of these days, so maybe we can skip that one for now. But how do we align? How do we find consensus? How do we figure out what it is that I'm talking about the royal we, like that the community wants to say, and I'm not sure how that's going to be possible. Like, are you thinking like a working group, like a group of people get together and say, hey, we're the DAO PR team now or something?
I haven't thought too much about it yet, to be honest. Like, there's a couple of ways I guess we could go. Like, we could go down the route of having, like as you said, like PR at a PR domain team. So like a PR, like ratified and like PR person who like attempts to synthesize some points from like things the community have been saying, which doesn't sound like a fun job. Or potentially we can have, again, like doing it otherwise is kind of difficult, but we can attempt to, rather than having one person whose job it is to sort of spread that message, we can potentially just try and decide on like some points that people loosely agree with, and then sort of keep that as a list for people to look at, like when they want to try and combat like FUD and whatnot.
Yeah, it feels like they could be divided up into two buckets, right? Because when it comes to opinions or positions or principles of the DAO, that requires alignment, because that's assuming a very significant responsibility that, hey, I'm speaking for the DAO now, and so let's call up the crypto medias and start getting scare quotes out there. But there's also, on the other end of the spectrum, there's just simply factual information, right? Like we wouldn't need a tremendous amount of coordination to have a group of people just go out there and go, okay, that's a great article, but you got X, Y, and Z wrong. Can you guys please fix it?
I don't think we have. So yeah, there's some issue with that in like news articles, but like in general, I think like factual, like spreading facts isn't too much of a problem. Like, we have like Reddit and things. We can make posts in various places to say
Reddit is where the incorrect facts start.
Yeah, I end up on Reddit. I know people use Twitter. Twitter is another thing you can use.
This is also bigger than just like making statements or writing articles. It's like all marketing, like how you present DAI or present vaults. Like that's what people's perceptions are of it. And like the liquidation penalty example, like it definitely wasn't clear that vault owners can lose a lot of collateral. So it's more than, just more than making statements.
Yeah, that's true. I'm kind of thinking of it more in like the kind of emergency sense, in that like in the last week or so, it would have been nice to be able to say like definitively, yes, we're planning on like compensating vault holders. Like obviously we can't do that because we haven't discussed things.
But that wouldn't matter as much if like the marketing and communication was more accurate before.
Yeah, I agree. There's definitely like a non-emergency like role there as well, I think, which again is possibly done by the same group or same people. But yeah,
it feels like there's a good opportunity here to this is the time too, right? Because postmortems need to happen. We need to look back and try and figure out what happened. Like I'm in the middle of all this stuff and I'm not even sure what happened really. At the course of the last week, all these threads, a lot of things happen. I don't have them all tied up right now, and I don't know the cause of all of them. So and that stuff needs to be communicated externally as well. And we're already we're at this phase of maturity, I think, in the community where the community can self-organize and start taking responsibility for those roles themselves. And so maybe now is the time, like as part of this post-mortem process, to have a community working group kind of join in on that process. and figure out how to talk about these things.
Yeah, potentially. I feel that again. I feel we're in this sort of same situation as usual, which is where there's like lots of things that we should be doing, but there's a limited pool of people to do them, unfortunately.
Well, that's a great segue, because there's people in this call I'm reasonably sure that would be great additions to this burgeoning and potentially hypothetical team. Are there people in the call that have experience in this world, in the PR world, in public communications, community building, stuff like that, that wanted to offer some suggestions? I see other Rich shaking his head, but he's one of the guys that I'm hoping would jump right on this and help out. We need some more
I mean,
farm-based, buddy.
I'm interested in helping out, but I feel like this is a bit different than like normal public communications, because the system, like you said, like you don't even know what happened. Like very few people like know exactly what happened, and that whole thing needs to be communicated, that this is like a really complicated experiment that we don't completely understand.
Yeah.
And I don't think that has been communicated.
Well, yeah, this is where everything gets murky, right? Because at least to some extent, at least with governance and with the votes and with the on-chain polling and all the rest of it, and with the tech stack, we can dig through commit histories and blog posts and all the rest of it, and we can have like, okay, here's what happened, because we can just look at it. But when it comes to messaging and external factors and aligning what the community thinks about certain topics and what the community would like to have understood about certain topics, there are no roadmaps, right? Like that requires alignment and an assumption of a certain amount of responsibility, because this core group is going to be potentially responsible for saying things on behalf of a large and amorphous group of individuals who are, we know what their addresses are, but we don't know who they are or what they're thinking or why they do their things, right? It's going to be a super tough job.
There's another aspect that makes it even more complicated, is that we can't really have like private conversations in that the membership of the DAO is open, right? Like,
yeah.
So any conversations we have, like in which we're trying to move towards a public statement, are also public.
Yeah, crafting a message, it requires a lot of like drafts that can never see the light of day, right? Because people need to brainstorm. And so how would you do that in a decentralized manner?
Yeah,
it's a tough problem.
I think anybody who's got communication skills and is interested in this, could consider like speaking up. So long as somebody's got a willingness to learn, I think you don't necessarily need to like have been a brand manager or anything. Like you've used social media, things about Maker, and you can communicate well and are excited by this.
I certainly didn't intend to raise the bar. Like we're only expecting communications degrees to show up. Like obviously, we've already seen this group as a perfect example that it doesn't matter where you come from or what you do or whether you deliver pizzas all day long. You could be a genius, and we desperately need your input.
A little bit of slope up for a lot of y-intercept, to use a math expression, if that makes sense to anyone.
So
you learn quickly. It doesn't matter if you're starting from a low point.
So I've been taking summaries of these meetings for a few weeks, and I got to say I've been incredibly impressed with the community's response over this last week. I mean, from the panic of Black Thursday to the developing, mechanisms for these auctions, I think it's amazing, and I think that a lot of people would be really impressed at how the responses of the community and these calls have happened. So, I don't have a communications background, but I'd be interested in this if possible.
Yeah, there's certainly not going to be any gatekeeping. So if people are interested, we're not going to say no to help. I mean, and I keep on saying we. I mean, like I wear a bunch of hats, and I mean, from the community perspective, I doubt that there's going to be anybody turned away at the door. Well, I think that maybe one of the interesting things to add to the list of to-dos for a group like that would be to identify negative narratives, right, and try to get ahead of those. Like, obviously, we've seen concerns about USDC, and from the brief moments of free time I've had over the last week, digging into Reddit and crypto Twitter and all the rest, there's been a ton of reaction that frequently, like obviously concerns are valid. We all know that we took the ecosystem's taken on a certain amount of risk with the USDC, but the concerns that I've noticed, just anecdotally, are the wrong concerns. If people have concerns, we should also help them and help ensure that they have the right ones, right? Like it's not just spin. We need to make sure that people are aware of like literally or existing and relevant risks that the world needs to know about, as opposed to the fake ones that the world doesn't need to worry about. Right?
So I have a question. From my vantage point, it seems like there's only 3 scenarios. There's like one which an external, let's just say reporter, listens in on a call because it's publicly available, and then they just quote people without them knowing they're being quoted. That's happened. Second scenario is they could reach out to individual people, and those people will give quotes, and they'll just say, but I don't speak on behalf of anyone or everyone. So that's like second scenario. And then like maybe there's a third scenario where they reach out to people who are on this call, ask them for a quote, and that person says, oh yeah, and I represent, MakerDAO community. In the past, from my vantage point, not being like super close to any of this, like the Messaris, the CoinDesk, like the Block people, like I see them on this call. Like which of those scenarios do they usually reach out to, or has it been like across the board, they just read out in a haphazard kind of fashion?
So I've noticed that like I've been quoted on like the forums and like this call. I think the forums more than this call before, which is somewhat surreal and annoying.
Yeah, it makes me laugh every time I see it though. So if it helps you feel any better, I enjoy it intensely watching you.
Yeah, I mean, if it increases team morale, I guess that's fine.
Yeah, there's something to be said for that. You're a thought leader now. Yeah, those are great points, Rich. And that's one of the things I'm trying to wrap my head around too, is that it's the community needs to, this is a long process. Okay, so maybe I'm going to get philosophical for a second here, but we have.
Can we get on with the agenda and you get philosophical after?
Oh, Mariano.
I actually agree with Mariano.
Today.
Yeah, no, I agree. Because I want to talk about STD shutdown, but also because I take notes on this call too for quite a period of time, and I think the best place to hash this out is actually in the forum, either in a category that's like messaging, or creating a working group. So I'll do what I can to throw some resources that way. So
fine, I guess I'll just shut up and turn off my camera, and I'll let the important people get to work. Message I foresee right now.
Mariano's running out of time, so.
Yeah. All right, that sounds cool. Yeah, we can revisit this towards the end. There's obviously a lot of really interesting nuances to be understood. So that brings us to, sorry, Mariano, which topic do we?
Let's talk about the flop auctions, I think, right, Mariano? Yeah. So I'm going to give a very quick update on the flop auctions, and then I think Mariano or Kurt may say a few things as well. So as of about an hour ago, so we've had 33 completed auctions, according to, let me get the link for, right. So I posted the link to the auctions UI in the sidebar, and over there you can see that 33 auctions have completed. I believe the closing price for every single one of those was 265 DAI, and then 7 are still pending due to the TTL, and those should oh no, it looks like 37 are complete now, and there's 3 remaining. Right, and then so there is another 67 of these auctions that will need to be triggered, and I'll let one of the devs speak about that for a bit.
Yeah, sure. So I'll go ahead and jump in here. Hi, everybody. My name is Kurt. I work for the Maker Foundation Smart Contracts team. So if anyone was paying attention very much to the public messaging, you might have seen me or others in chat saying we're expecting 49 flop auctions on Thursday. And if you look, you see that only 40 flop auctions happened. So this begs the question, where did the other 9 flop auctions go? Well, one of them we think basically got sniped out by just enough surplus came in to prevent it from being triggered, but that leaves you 8 auctions. What happened? So unfortunately, I haven't had time to make slides to explain this, so this might be a little high level and or fuzzy. But basically in the system's asynchronous accounting system, debt that goes to flop auctions is treated a little bit differently than other types of debt, and it needs to be canceled out through a separate mechanism. And yesterday, in the course of triggering these various debt cancellation mechanisms, keepers triggered things in an order in which basically 8 flop auctions worth of debt is kind of stuck in a state where it can't actually be flopped right now. You can describe this as a bug in the system. It's a very minor bug. It can be easily addressed through a governance action to kind of convert that stuck debt into a form where it's not stuck anymore and it can be flopped. And, you know, we could talk about putting that into this week's executive, but I don't think there's any huge rush. In the long term, smart contract upgrades can be used to address this. And maybe just to make it perfectly clear what the bug is, because it's not like the debt is untracked. It'll still sit there and be canceled by surplus as it comes in. But the reason you'd consider it a bug is that the contract basically has failed to start the correct amount of flops in the promised amount of time. So it's a violation of that property that, you know, you should start enough flops to cover all your debt within the waiting period after the debt came in. I think that basically summarizes it. I'll open it up here for questions. And like I say, a more detailed explanation will be forthcoming, but we realized this like late last night and I just woke up in my time zone, so I haven't had time to make a nice presentation for you.
So
I think it was, yeah.
Sorry,
Go
just
ahead,
really
Cyrus.
quickly, for those of us who didn't quite catch the explanation, can you characterize the severity of this issue?
Mild. Like if it's
mild for who, and what does this mean? Like it's an inconvenience for the people that won these auctions.
No, so what Kurt said is that we were debating whether to call this a bug or not. We decided that yes, it is a mild bug because it breaks what the contract should do. So after a waiting period, bad debt should be flushed out and sold, you know, in debt auctions. And the way this happened is that some amount is stuck. So right now it cannot be flushed out after the wait period, which is 6.5 days, but it can be canceled out with surplus still. So the debt is still there, right? It's not like it is going away. Only that, yeah, it kind of breaks the, you know, the risk parameter thing of, hey, if there is bad debt after a certain amount of time, the system will create flop auctions to cancel it out by minting MKR, right? So right now, I believe there's 400K of it.
Yeah, basically there's close to 400,000 or the amount of 8 flop auctions that's in this kind of stuck state where even though it's bad debt that exists in the system, it won't actually get flop auctions launched to cover it. Instead, it would have to be covered by surplus coming in from other sources, either liquidation penalties or stability fees. Like I said, governance can take simple, straightforward action to unblock these flop auctions. And long-term, we can address it through smart contract upgrades. It's kind of still in discussion exactly what the best fix for this is, given the need to balance technical risk of upgrading certain core contracts. But that's the basic summary.
Can I get an idea of or can we get an idea of how much more we expect to get stuck based on the coming flop auctions?
Well, it depends on the behavior of keepers. Basically, there are two functions in the accounting system that cancel out bad debt. One is for canceling out bad debt that's been sent to flop auctions. The other is for canceling out what I'll just refer to as free debt, which means debt that's not in the queue and also hasn't gone to a flop auction. And if keepers are only using the function that cancels out the free debt, that's how this problem arises where debt gets stuck. So keepers should prioritize canceling out debt that's gone to flop auctions before they cancel out the free debt. We're trying to make sure the code of any like open source keepers we have, implements this logic now, but it's a permissionless system. So there's no guarantee that it won't happen, right? Because there are other bots out there and people are using even smart contract proxies and who knows what logic they have implemented. So it's hard to say whether it'll happen at all. If keepers are calling the functions in the right order, it doesn't have to happen. So we don't know yet, but you can kind of put a bound on it by, looking at the rate, because at the rate at which things come off the SYN queue versus the rate at which surplus is probably coming in from flop auctions, it won't be all of it. It could be some of it. It may not happen at all.
Yeah. Okay. As far as I understand, there's no incentive for keepers to do this on purpose, though. Is that like it's bad for them because they don't get to bid on the debt, right?
Yeah. It doesn't help keepers at all.
Yeah. Okay. Cool.
We're trying to participate in these auctions, and like I said, it's not really an attack on the system because governance can always fix it quite easily. It's just the system behaving in a way it wasn't designed to. I guess if you're a real code as law adherent, there's no problem, but I don't take that position on this. The system was supposed to have a certain behavior and it's not quite conforming to that behavior. So I would term this a bug.
So with all of this said, so I would guess our recommendation would be, so first we notify the community as we're doing now. We're gonna have, I think, did I hear correct? This is recorded that Kurt volunteered to write this up.
Yeah, I'm gonna make slides. Maybe I should have stayed up all night last night, but then I probably wouldn't be able to explain this as coherently. So hopefully this is a coherent explanation.
So what timeline does smart contracts recommend? Is this something that we want to delay the current executive?
No. I mean, unless the community feels that this is like a huge problem, which in our opinion it's not, because there are going to be more flop auctions coming. It is just like we said, it's like less than 10% of what they are right now that are blocked. So there's still going to be flop auctions incoming, and we can once we tell the community, via slides and a forum post what this is and what we think the fix should be, because it is going to require a governance vote. We can have it next week.
Let's
we don't need to rush it. Yes.
Let's just clarify like what the worst case here is, right? So the only thing that can happen right now is that a few more of the auctions get stuck and get delayed. That's the only thing if we don't do anything. If we act too hastily, we could have a bug or worse things could happen. So I don't think this is very time critical. I think we should analyze this very carefully and make sure that we do the right thing. Also maybe looking at the next steps, not just this one fix, but also how do we then patch the system so that this can't happen anymore?
Yeah, we already have a short, medium, and long term. Well, the long term we're gonna live for later, but a short and medium term discussion how to fix it.
But bottom line is we should take our time to do things right, because making a mistake would be much more damaging than just have a few auctions that get delayed.
Yeah. I think that makes sense to me as
I'm
well.
in complete support of what Wouters just said.
I would just say like the absolute worst case would be someone doing it to all the auctions on purpose, right? Like not saying that it's likely, but like.
Well, exactly. If we notice
all the auctions necessarily, like,
right,
it depends on it depends on the timing of things, of surplus coming in from various sources like other
Right,
flop
okay.
auctions, and also the timing of debt coming off of the SYN queue or in from other sources. So it's not even like guaranteed, like you could sit down and say, I'm a mastermind, I can block all the flop auctions. It just depends on
too many other
how
interactions.
all those different moving parts interact, and you might be able to block some of them, but governance can always defeat you in the end, right? So it's, well, maybe I shouldn't use the word defeat. Governance can always fix the things you break in the end. That's maybe that's the more.
So really, the first priority should be to try and configure the keepers in a way so that the window for, let's call it sabotage, so intentionally delaying these auctions, that window is as small as possible, and then potentially there won't be a single one that even can be delayed. So I think if that's our first priority, then then there is no issue going forward.
Yeah, it doesn't sound urgent from what you guys are saying, so I think I agree.
Yeah, I'd say, by next week sometime, maybe we should just wait for this, coming batch of flop auctions. That's what, in 1 or 2 days from now, on the 22nd. I keep forgetting what day it is now, but that'll happen. And then kind of after that's done, we'll sort of have this, okay, here's all the debt that's stuck. Then next week we run an executive to unblock that and send it back to flop auctions potentially, with all the keepers, fixed up and awareness raised of the issue. And then in the weeks after that, we explore upgrading smart contracts to make sure this isn't a problem going forward that we have to deal with. That'd be my suggested timeline from a technical perspective.
Okay, well, there's things to be absorbed here then, so we'll look forward to the explanation in the forums. I think that I believe that potentially today's executive has been delayed for some kind of consensus to be reached. It feels like there's no fires right now, so let's regroup in the forum thread and then figure out see if there's any edge risks that we didn't identify, and then deal with it there. Is that okay with you, Mariano? Does that sound right?
I realized that sounded bad, dude. It wasn't my intention.
No worries. I had actually no idea that this fire was brewing, or else I wouldn't have been philosophizing while
it's okay.
While this was going on.
Yeah, Rich, just to be clear, there's our normal cadence as an executive, and it's being finished up right now. So.
Okay, cool. Right on. Thanks, Chris. Cyrus, do you want to? Well, let's see. The flop auction results, we kind of went over that, though. Did you have additional insights that you wanted to talk about, Cyrus?
Not really. I think the prices speak for themselves. I don't think there's really much to analyze at this stage, to be honest. If there's anything that the community has to talk about it, I'm all ears, but I don't really think so.
I have a question for you, though. So how did the system work as a price discovery mechanism? Was it good for the protocol? Was it good for the auction participants?
It actually worked, I think, surprisingly better than anyone had expected. One was we saw, I think, a fairly diverse range of participation. So we saw, I think we definitely saw multiple bidders. And then secondly, this 6-hour waiting period didn't appear to factor in much of a discount for the bidding price. And then thirdly, the secondary market liquidity also didn't really seem to be much of a disincentive either. So I think just very preliminary conclusions is that it was successful for what we've seen so far.
Avishesh and Cybar, you said it worked well as well. Do you have any other additional insights, or does that sort of cover your perspective as well?
I think that pretty much covers it. On the PR side, there's a rumor going around about the foundation participating in the auction, so that would be another good one to squash.
Yeah, I saw something, I think, about that. Yeah, oh, yeah, something about the contracts all ending up, or some primary contract or something. I can't remember. I didn't have the time to troll crypto Twitter this morning.
I'll see if I can pull it up.
All right. Those flop auctions, we still have emergency. Well, we started that conversation with a question, and then we immediately moved on to other things possibly. So do you want to start talking about emergency shutdown criteria? See if that
I mean, I can ask questions, but everyone seems pretty exhausted. I'm not sure if it's the best time. Just in general, like for MKR holders, like what do we need to know exactly? Like what parameters are changeable by governance? At what point should we be thinking about emergency shutdown, and like what situations is that applicable?
Can you post some of the threads where can somebody who has a forum open post some of the threads? Because there's 3 or 4 of them happening, I believe, for various aspects of what SCD's emergency shutdown encompasses.
Yeah, and sorry about that post. It's a bit rambly, I'll be honest, but yeah, the first one, Long for Wisdom, posted.
No, it's fine. It's fine. It's good. Start the conversation properly. So.
All right, can you talk about some of your major points from that forum thread? Why have we ignored this mechanism? Exclamation mark, question mark, exclamation mark.
Well, partly just we haven't, like, I didn't hear anyone like discussing it during this whole like crisis situation. I heard Cyrus say yesterday that it's potentially like non-viable. I wasn't quite sure what that meant.
Well, I can create some context here.
What was non-viable that I said?
Emergency shutdown. I might have misunderstood the like context you were saying it, but you're talking about like emergency like responses if the liquidity situation got a lot worse and if ETH fell and whatnot.
Oh, I think that must have been a miscommunication of sorts. But Rich, why don't you?
Seeing it in the context of doing it before the flop auctions, so it was going to be a crunch to try and get it in before the flop auctions were done.
Emergency shutdown was going to be a crunch to get in before the flop auctions. I'm kind of confused here.
Yeah, for SCD, it was going to be difficult to
do.
Do.
For SCD. Oh.
Yeah, to do SCD.
Oh, I thought we were talking about.
Yeah, I'm talking about
MCD.
MCD. Yeah, I'm talking about MCD.
Yeah.
Sorry.
But SCD is also a thing that we have to talk about at some point too. But
yeah, why don't we set some context? Rich, you were going to say something, and then also let's clarify that we were doing philosophical discussions on how MCD ES might work.
Well, yeah, there's a number of conversations. So, well, here's an example of how confusing this could be. I thought we were talking about SCD, emergency shutdown. I didn't realize it was MCD. So, but they all kind of boil down to the same base questions that need to be answered. What are the thresholds that are in place? Like, what are the criteria to raise the specter? I think is from a community perspective, from an ecosystem perspective, when does that button get pressed? Number 2, what are the implications of pressing that button, which I think are poorly understood. There's some hand waviness here that, well, in my own personal opinion, there's some hand waviness here that I don't think that we've all completely internalized. So the idea is that you shut down and then you start up. Shutting down, I think those mechanisms are understood. Starting back up again, though, I have no idea what that even means. So that's something that we need to figure out as well. We need to understand, but back to the mechanisms, we also need to understand, like, literally, what are these steps that need to occur and in what order, and how does communication around that happen? And the other, sorry, I'm drifting a bit, but there's some base principles I think that we need to figure out and then start working our way back up again, right? And I think that maybe I would say what we're talking about here is the thresholds. In what situations and for what reasons is emergency shutdown considered?
That's very accurate.
All right. Well,
And that
mhm.
just that MKR holders need to like understand this if they're gonna vote on it. That's a big part.
Well, we can obviously start there. So let's open the floor. Like this is the big red button, right? So let's. What are people's opinions about what threshold has to be met before the thing gets turned off?
Don't have like a specific threshold, but like my kind of main feeling behind it is that you want to use it to limit like it's difficult because you kind of want to trigger it before like the worst possible thing happens, which means you then need to make like a prediction about the worst possible thing happening, because you want to do it to protect like DAI holders, like ideally, right? So that when you shut down, DAI holders end up with $1 worth of collateral. But in order to do that, you need to predict when like liquidations or whatever will happen, which is going to end up with bad debt in the system, which would then turns into at shutdown not getting $1 worth of collateral. So like
you might have hit on something here. So it's prediction, right? So
well,
do we need models to maybe tell us at what point we might hit no return?
I think that's a super tricky proposition that was just mentioned, because if you're trying to trigger ES before some sort of big loss is about to happen, I mean, you could be saving one stakeholder in the system, but very directly at the expense of another, right? And I don't think we've clearly established the lines of who should be saved and who should be kind of the opposite, right? So I think when dealing with like financial based thresholds or heuristics, I think it becomes super tricky. As a separate example, like I think one other criteria for ES that I've heard that is kind of just a counterpoint to yours is it should only be used for technical issues, and anything that's kind of financial related or the protocol is operating as intended does not necessarily warrant the use of ES. I'm not saying I agree with that. I'm just saying that there's like a super wide range of criteria here, and I think we have to be super careful.
This is part of the problem, right? Different people have different ideas as to what the proper criteria are, right? Like, as you say, some people think it should be just like if there's a technical issue, that it's like very, very bad, or if it's a risk of like governance attack or something that's going to drain collateral or something, or on the other hand, you have like, whether you want to trigger it to like limit losses to like to users of the system, right? And then which users, which as you said is not.
And this also kind of circles back to the PR thing, because we say emergency shutdown is, we don't know exactly, but what we do in the worst case scenario, but we don't like we're clearly asking, we still have a lot of questions, and if we have questions, that definitely means users have no idea what that means.
Yeah, can I chime in here a little bit? So we literally had an event that is still being digested. You can go say, hey, right in the middle of that event, we had $5 million of losses building. I mean, we literally saw that. And basically the auctions were flying off at zero, roughly. Everybody was scrambling to fill that hole. And the market was dropping. I mean, you basically had a scenario where if you ES'd right then, worst case, 5 million in the hole, and you look at the recovery after that, let's say it all would have been the same, which it may or may not have been. die holders would have had the ETH collateral that would have went up in value, so the die peg actually would have went up. So, you know, you can look at that event and go, is that, you know, was that the criterion? I hear Cyrus over here basically saying, well, you know, the suggestion is by a lot of people is that, you know, the only thing he shut down for is a technical issue. Is zero auctions bid a technical issue? I think a lot of people think no. I think a lot of your vault owners are like, hell yeah. And so, you know, in the loosest sense there, you know, if that wasn't it, and this is why I brought this up, what is? Because if Maker as a community is going to decide it's only going to be technical issues that we're going to shut this down for, it literally means that everybody is going to, you know, die holders will get crushed, Maker holders will get crushed, ETH holders, like the vault holders, will end up wherever. And in ES, I see the vault holders as kind of being kind of the best case. I see die holders as just getting whipsawed crazy. And then it just depends on how much loss is built into the system, you know, already before ES that the Maker holders may be on the hook for. Because if Maker kind of goes to zero in an ES, then I don't know how Maker holders can be on the hook. They already hooked themselves into total loss. And so it's a real question. If you guys aren't going to ES, then literally your vault owners and die holders need to know that. If you are, then we kind of need to know the conditions. And there isn't really an in-between for your other stakeholders here, which is part of the PR problem is that you got vault owners and die people here, you know, that are kind of all over the map. The vault holders definitely, you know, I started that thread just so that some angst could be vented in a productive way on the, well, we make you kind of whole, because when I look at the numbers, I'm like, man, Maker ate a heck of a lot of money here. Why are we thinking about making anybody whole? But to at least have a discussion about it and to have people have a vent place, I thought was positive, even though I do see those things and I haven't really replied much there. And so I just see this as a real issue that we need to solve. And then simultaneously, the SCD shut down, you know. And so, and then the mechanics of all that, you know, you shut down, then people want to get at collateral. Can we do it right now in the MCD or the SCD? And so that's kind of my take, and kind of why I rolled on this was like, it really looked like Maker holders, you know, what I saw was like right there, if you're not going to ES us here, I don't know when you're going to do it. And then kind of everybody like, oh, okay, we're fixing everything. And we come back and now we're back, and we could end up in the same boat again. And I generally agree, if you're going to ES, you really don't want to do it in the worst market conditions. You'd like things to be reasonably stable, but it's a double-edged sword, you know. And so we kind of have to decide if Maker holders are going to kind of die on the sword and we're not going to ES it unless it's a technical issue, or something else. I mean, it's a very valid and real discussion. And this isn't just a PR optic thing. It's got to be decided, and then the PR's got to go on it. So that's my take on it.
Yeah, with ES, you really have to ask, who are you protecting and from what, if you're going to trigger it? That's sort of the core question.
Yeah, that's maybe a good way to look at it.
I mean, I think it's appropriate that we throw this up for the entire community discussion, not just Maker holders, but vault holders as well, and die owners. But in some ways, you know, this whole, if we ES, you know, here's what happens. If we don't ES, here's what happens. You know, literally some scenarios have to be real scenarios have to be laid out, and we can take the last event as the real scenario, one of them, and just lay it out. Go, what do you guys want? And then, but that's going to unleash a discussion that's going to be PR optically very bad, that we should have a handle on this as a community, and even people listening in now are listening to this, but we literally have to get, because Maker holders are going to be the ones that decide what we think about this. And so we should at least get a handle on what we think about it before we go soliciting for anything else out there on this.
One thing that's also worth mentioning is that like any like decision we try to come to on this isn't actually like binding, right? Like, so especially in the fact that any maker holder with enough maker, or like any like syndicate of maker holders with enough maker, can shut down the system at any point. So it's difficult to say like we will definitely not shut down in this situation, because some maker holder could disagree and shut it down anyway, right? Like, so that's also needs to be part of the thing. It's difficult for us to actually like agree to something, and like commit to it.
I do think it's valuable though to have an agreement on what we consider to be a non-malicious shutdown, because you know if one user disagrees with what people are doing and shuts down, that could be a pretty controversial thing, and you're burning your MKR as well while you're doing it. And so having some type of community agreement on these things we think are really important to shut down in this scenario, can at least give someone who is burning their MKR to shut down a little bit of certainty that they'll get their MKR back in a redeploy, because the governance will vote to mint them more MKR. Whereas if you don't have some guidelines, it's a very scary thing to do.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, Andy.
Yeah, honestly, other than the CC, great point on the ES, because I considered the ES a kind of attack vector as a system brew, but now that it's shrinking, I think it's unlikely. But the idea of having a discussion on this and kind of coming to some sort of consensus and doing this privately, I honestly don't even see how we do it. So this is something that will be an ongoing discussion and something we won't solve in a day.
No, it's a huge discussion. I think that we can't, it's very important to understand, like I said, we can map out, it's not impossible to map out the process and the policies and the social norms that lead us to an emergency shutdown, but I very much like to see some clear understanding of what reinitialization of the system looks like, and what the realistic expectations are of what that mechanism is, and what the community response to that is, and what the ecosystem's response to that is. Because personally, and very, very personally, this is my opinion, that it's naive to assume that, okay, we've shut down the system and then next week we're going to start it and then everything's going to be fine. We need to understand clearly what restarting the system is, and what our expectations are around that, or the community's expectations are around that, and what it looks like, and its chances of success, and what additional work and overhead it will require to reinitialize. Do people feel like I'm off base here? But like, do we have opinions? Is there anybody in the call that has?
No, I think you're kind of a step after, because I think the idea of like if we are going to ES it or not is kind of, I think it's everybody's just digesting the idea of like redeploying a Maker v3 after such a debacle. I think depending on the circumstance and situation, it's totally going to affect that. And so I think people are a bit reluctant to think about that when we're kind of still digesting, are we even going to do it, and what the heck does it mean? And so it's a bit of a step forward, which is probably why silence. So.
Yeah, I agree completely. It's a difficult question, because we have to make guesses about what the future would look like, which I'm always very hesitant to do. But if people are considering the parameters and the reasoning and the thresholds for shutting down, it has to be understood whether they're doing that under the assumption that it will magically just come back the next week. If that would significantly lower the bar, I think, in people's minds when they're coming up with these mechanisms. If they're coming up with these mechanisms with the assumption that it may or may not restart next week or next month, then that would affect the discussion, I think.
Yeah, like I said, given the nature of this beast, I think a lot of us are going to have to sit and digest this. I think what needs to be done is sort of a scenario presentation. If we don't EF, you throw the scenarios out. If we don't EF, here's what happens. If we do EF, here's what happens. And lay out some scenarios so that people can look at this and then let everybody free for all on it. And like I said, this isn't going to be solved in a day or maybe a week, but we could literally be here within a week kind of deciding, are we ESing this or no? And so I think it's a hard problem that we are not going to be able to solve quickly, unfortunately.
So also keep in mind, emergency shutdown does mean that we break every outside integration with the system. Chai breaks, Aave breaks, Compound breaks, Numerai breaks, and I can go on. So it really should be considered as a last resort, and keep that in the back of your mind when planning.
Yeah, it's a great point. Like it's obviously lots of discussions about who the primary stakeholders are, and the community needs to align on that. But presumably, there's a longer tail of an impact here, right? Like DeFi does circle around Maker at this point. So there's other considerations that need to be considered.
I think this is why we have these discussions, is that, I would not have, I could have guessed, but I would not have thought that it would just break everything else that's out there in the DeFi system. And so that takes a yes even more off the table, so to speak. And so implications of this are across the board. But this is why we have to have this discussion, and we need people like you guys to come forward and go, these are the implications of this. And we need to lay out these scenarios and have every brain on this going. This is why we really don't want to do this, because most of us probably don't have a real clear understanding of the total implications of this. And we kind of need all hands on deck on a real discussion on this with real scenarios.
So there's scenario planning, there's the thresholding and to initiate the thing, and then there's the actual mechanism involved with how does it work. And then 4, I guess, is what are the recovery plans? Like there's obviously going to be a discontinuity in service here. And so how does that service get resumed is a major issue that needs to be addressed as well.
And the point Long for Wisdom brought up that like we don't, just by like discussing it, we can put out scenarios and stuff, but Maker holders are the ones that do emergency shutdown. So we don't know how they will act always.
Well, yeah, that's the never present situation. Like that's what our governance ecosystem looks like. We have, it's evolving all the time, and we have to step outside of it and try to figure out what it is the world we live in looks like. But we have this group of people and in the forums and in the chats that are a very sort of loose, possibly representative democracy, depending, like it's obviously not civil resistant, but we have lots and lots and lots of voices that are doing work on the front line, setting the tone of the conversation and process and all the rest of it. And I think that we've seen historically that the major holders, the voters, follow that lead, right? We haven't, as far as, I don't know, that's, I shouldn't say it without having any evidence, but I'm unfamiliar with any examples of the holders coming out and doing something that's just completely out of left field against the. Sorry, it's been a long week. So the point of saying is that the ecosystem follows the community of holders follows the tone and the processes and the initiatives that are created in these groups, and so it's not a wasted effort. Makerman, that for us to as an ecosystem to start defining these thresholds and all the rest of it, these mechanisms.
Yeah, I think Andy's point was the main one. It needs to be, this conversation needs to be focused around what's like governance can agree will not be considered a malicious shutdown. Which like is a minor reframe, but like ends up being, I think, fairly significantly what the discussions are around and things. Or the outcomes.
Feels like we have that thread in the forum though, don't we? Like, are we already going down this path of collecting these thresholds and these ideas?
Yeah, I think so. We're on the right path, right? It's not going to get solved like immediately, but yeah. It's kind of like you've been saying before, right? We need to just like not drop the threat of figuring that out, right?
Yeah, precisely. And this, yeah, and obviously, I keep on hitting this beat, but we, as a community and as an ecosystem as a whole, have these cycles of urgency, apathy, and denial. And so now we're feeling the urgency of understanding these issues because the market has forced us to pay attention to these uncomfortable issues. The risk right now in my mind is that markets stabilize, crypto goes up, and then we don't worry about this stuff anymore because it's painful and unpleasant to think about. And we have to kind of force our way through that mental block and continue to get a plan in place because it's naive to expect that unpleasantness won't occur again. We need to be prepared for it.
Yeah, I mean, if we like launch into like massive bull market like last time, like there's going to be a point where that bull market stops and everything comes crashing down again. So we need to be like ready for that situation.
Yeah. We'll be able to get some understanding as well once we begin talking. There's another thread happening, which is why I was confused initially when we started this conversation. But obviously, there's discussion in the forum about the SCD shutdown, right? And so there's going to be some interesting things to learn from that mechanism, which might help us inform mental models for the MCD situation. Oh yeah, MakerMan is ahead of me again, so that was a segue potentially to SCD shutdowns. I'm having some concerns about this call though, because people are dropping off rapidly, and so I'm wondering if the conversation might be winding down or not. I'm happy to stick around and continue to discuss the. It would be nice long to come out of this in my tote as well, to come out with this conversation with at least some action items. Like, okay, we've identified those 4 points that I've listed out, so maybe those are the next 3 directions we need to begin exploring, or four directions we need to be exploring. Does that make sense?
So I have a suggestion, and maybe it's a reframe, but for a takeaway, I see like at least the technical parts of like emergency shutdown being like purely up to MKR holders and the foundation. But I think it still makes sense, given there's a DeFi community, that like the members of the other DeFi companies or organizations or communities kind of press the foundation to actually get clarity. And so I would almost say that like in our threads, we have a lot of people who are from other protocols, but I would imagine that like if you take those like 4 or so steps or bullet points and put them into a presentation, that maybe there's just like a room for a consortium of like a handful of people from each of the protocols, whoever wants to like participate. And then they kind of, and maybe Maker community partakes in that, and then everyone kind of presses upon foundation to make those things clear. Because from my understanding, this conversation, you know, we can lay out as many thresholds as we want, but still it's up to the foundation and up to MKR holders, unless I'm misunderstanding the situation. And so my takeaway would be like, if there are 2 or 3 people on this call or in the community, to kind of reach out to the people from Compound, from Dharma, from others, like that would be a good step to get a little consortium.
And I wouldn't mind expanding the scope a bit, because I think you've hit the nail on the head on something here that has been bothering me. So this group here is talking about potential stakeholders and what their potential needs might be and how they might potentially be affected. But it probably would be a great idea just to talk to them and find out, right? Like, what do the DAI holders think? What do the vault owners think their thresholds are? What is the DeFi space? What's their wish list for a threshold? And what would they hope for from a reinitialization plan, all the rest of it, right? Like, this is a broad discussion. It's a great point.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that a lot.
Yeah, expanding even like on the point that I think Rich has just mentioned there, it would be worth even actually talking to those people across the ecosystem and the other protocols to ask them about, like, in terms of like your risk plans, because those people are definitely employing people, I would say, and other than having like also people around their communities. So but as part of like the risk contingency plans, they would actually really considering seriously the what would happen to their communities with an emergency shutdown. So it's kind of like a wider scope.
So to that point, I hate to suggest something and kind of back away, but I think that's something that, like, if other people in the forums have strong opinions about in the thread, that I would, one, partake in those forum threads, but also I'd probably volunteer and raise my hand to, you know, alongside a couple other people, if there is like an authoritative way to reach out to them and say, hey, we're having this thread, would you want to partake in a consortium? Because I think that's, well, hopefully not taking up too much time, I think that's something that could be done relatively soon to even see if it's feasible or not.
I don't think anybody is going to say no to that, so I appreciate it, man. That'd be amazing. If you
Yeah, and the
help
recency
the
of,
ecosystem to coordinate.
yeah, and I guess the recency of the crisis is also a good point not to lose, because same for us, the same way that probably like in a week's time, you know, like bull market staking and people kind of completely forgot about this, they might also like not pay too much attention whether there was actually an actual real risk of that happening. And the recency now actually kind of tells me that they would listen to participate.
Thanks for that feedback.
All right, we're heading dangerously into awkward silence territory. I'll try to wait it out. So let's make sure that the momentum does continue. So Rich, feel free to reach out to me or Long, and we can help you with any questions and maybe even reiterate some of the main points. Because I feel like there are 3 or 4 different parallel tracks we can initiate here. Figuring out how, when, why, and who would be super relevant when it comes to discussing this issue, and then getting some additional clarity so we're prepared for the next time we need to ask these uncomfortable questions. It's ultimately going to be a community-led initiative. The community needs to decide, right? Like the foundation doesn't make this decision. So the community needs to decide and create a platform for the rest of the ecosystem to understand what is going to happen, to help inform the holders so they are able to take appropriate action when the needs arise. So if there's anything we can do to help out, we will be at your disposal, Rich. And also there's parallel tracks internally. So we're tightening up documentation. We're releasing some information soon that just here's mechanically what it looks like. These are the buttons that need to be pressed. This is the order in which it needs to happen. So once we have that clarity for their community to work with, it'll be far easier to overlay or alter it based on the requirements of governance and communication and additional stakeholders that have been identified, and then we can use that to iterate. Because one of the issues I've seen with this conversation in the past is that we're trying to figure out how do we bite onto this thing so we can even get started with a real conversation. So we have philosophy and we have implementation, we have communication, but one of those is just mechanical implementation, and I think that that's probably a good launching off point, or at least it will help out once the community understands here's the A, B, C, D of the steps involved, then we can start modifying and or internalizing the implications of these steps.
Yeah, and like in terms of like going to the practical aspect of potentially those discussions would be, I think almost makes sense to have take a little bit of like the idea of Maker Man there around designing scenarios that actually put into the lives of like real people, like real personas, and then moving from those scenarios into kind of like trickle down the effects on the people. For example, like at least one category would be the direct stakeholders that engage with Maker, like vault holders and such. And then a secondary to that, like the scenarios where it actually trickles down to the people that don't engage at all with Maker directly, but more indirectly through those platforms. Putting like a number of those scenarios there, actually kind of it's a pretty good start, I think, for a conversation with those stakeholders, because it makes it real for them.
Yeah, use cases.
Yeah.
Who are super useful for this to figure out who are the demographics that would be affected, and then it would also help us to identify which community ecosystem actors need to be brought to bear, because we just talked about PR. Like if this is a thing, the next time that this discussion has to happen in earnest, communication is going to be tremendously important too. So who's going to be out there communicating these issues to the ecosystem as well in a targeted and coordinated manner? All right. I'm wondering, does anybody, have we talked about this? Are there still outstanding questions? Are people still digesting? I'm happy to hang out a bit. If there's other questions that haven't been addressed that people would like to squeeze in under the wire, we can do that as well. But the people in this room, we're losing viewers rapidly. So obviously there's other Friday pressures coming to bear here. What's the temperature of the room? Should we continue to discuss, or should we call it there and then move these discussions to the forum for a review, and then pick up the thread next Tuesday or Wednesday at our midweek governance call?
Personally.
Yeah. Just on the governance call, Rich, have you guys decided whether it's going to be back to the normal rhythm or weekly, or who's still going to do it?
Yeah, at the top of the call, was my assumption that potentially we don't need to do the daily thing anymore. Maybe I'm naive and overly optimistic, which I've been constantly accused of being, which is not true. But I'm thinking that Long pointed out that maybe we're in a middle ground. Maybe it's too early just to go back to the weeklies, and so he proposed we'll do 2 a week, which I think kind of makes sense to me as well. So either Wednesday or Tuesday we'll have a governance call next week, and then another one on Thursday.
Okay. Sounds good. Yeah.
Depending on markets. The market might change our mind though. And so we'll see what happens on the weekend. Maybe we'll have another. How about this? Let's hope that we don't have to talk to each other on Monday. Best case scenario. Otherwise, we'll pick it up again on Tuesday.
Everyone can get behind that.
Or I could just have a special. Rich is just going to talk about philosophy call on Monday. I'm happy to invite everybody to that.
Yeah. On a side note, actually, with all of those calls, like during this whole week, I found it's being like hugely valuable, because like maintains that like line of thought throughout the whole week. So that was actually hugely valuable despite the length of the calls. So yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I got sentimental last call, I believe, and I'll do it again. The intention was to maintain open lines of communication, but I can't overstate how valuable the input from this community has been in informing our decisions. And we came out of week of Black Thursday far stronger than we could have possibly been without the level of interaction we've seen in the forums and in this chat, or in this call and in our chat. So once again, thanks to everybody who's been showing up and helping us out. It's unbelievably heartwarming. So I think the StiFi thing has a chance. We've done a tremendous thing here this week.
I've also been super impressed this week with the positive discussion.
Can I make one point or talk about one thing in regarding to SCD? I know I don't want to go too into it, but it's looking like the polling is saying to forgive stability fees in SCD. So I'm wondering if we need to, what the priority is on lowering the debt ceiling for SCD in case that is the outcome, so that more people aren't just minting
in SCD. Cyrus, any thoughts? Is he here still?
Yeah, I'm here. I mean, I think the debt ceiling is somewhat tangential to the notion of fees or shutdown. They should, at this point, the debt ceiling should match the supply fairly closely.
I'm not sure what the room is right now.
Also, I want to point out that so that issue with the debt ceiling maxing behavior was when the DSR was a lot higher. It's no longer really an issue. Also, the time frames are like several months. You know, if we shut down in like a week or two, I think it's fine.
Okay, so it's not a huge priority right now. We can still wait, because I think that like polling is also saying people want to shut down within the month, and that's obviously has to go to on-chain poll, I guess, to see if that is what we want to do. But yeah, we have a little bit of time, and we don't have to worry too much about it then.
Yeah, I don't think it's an issue anymore.
Okay, cool.
All right, I'm going to make the call then. Thanks everybody for joining us again. Thanks for the various offers of help. Rich, I'm going to be following up with you to make good on that. And let's continue the thread about emergency shutdown, the threads in the forum, so we understand what it is we're talking about, and we have a plan for the next time that the specter gets raised. All right, thanks everybody. See you next week.